Co-chair.
Okay. Welcome to the meeting of the Emergency Committee on Tuesday the 24th of November, which is being convened to consider matters that relate to the Council's response to the coronavirus. Whilst members are joining the meeting virtually, they are able to fully participate and vote on matters for consideration. The meeting is being live streamed. Before we consider the business of today's agenda, I'll ask all members of the committee present to introduce themselves. I'm Councillor Maria Compton and I am Chair of this committee. Councillor Ali?
Yes, good evening. Councillor Ali, Vice Chair of the Emergency Committee.
Councillor Millard?
Oh yeah, Councillor Danny Millard, I'm Cabinet Member for Inclusive Economic Growth.
Thank you. Councillor Shaheen?
Hi, Councillor Shaheen, Farah Shaheen, Cabinet Member for Living Healthy Lives.
Councillor Moore?
Paul Moore, Councillor for Haitley Heath and Member of the Committee.
Thank you. We don't have any apologies for absence, I don't think, do we, David? No? Okay. Members to declare an interest in matters to be discussed. Does anyone have an interest to declare? No? Okay. Meetings held on the 11th of November are presented today. I move them as a current record. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ari, can you confirm?
Yes, I can second those minutes.
Thank you. Are they approved?
Aye.
Aye. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not aware of any additional business items for today. Agenda item 5, local restrictions support grant open scheme. Can I ask the head of ICT and revenues and benefits present to do that report? Sue Knowles?
Yes, thank you, Leader. So I've got a report to present to outline how we want to apply the local restrictions support grant open. So as you know, a couple of weeks ago, the government announced a number of different grant schemes aimed to help businesses because of local restrictions and then more recently national restrictions, which we are now facing. So one of the schemes introduced was the local restrictions support grant. And the guidance for this particular grant does allow certain areas of discretion if the local authority wants to operate that discretion. What I'm recommending to the Emergency Committee is that SANBOL operates the local restrictions support grants open in accordance with the guidance set by BES, and that we use the funding provided to only support those businesses in the hospitality, hotel, bed and breakfast and leisure industries that are still open but severely impacted by tiers 2 and 3 restrictions. And that's exactly what the guidance actually recommends we use this particular grant for. And the second recommendation is to agree for SANBOL to make grant payments in accordance with the amounts suggested in the guidance again set by BES. So the background and main considerations. The local restrictions support grant open was announced on the 22nd of October. It's actually effective from the 1st of August, this particular scheme is, and that's when the government introduced the different tier restrictions. So in SANBOL, we have actually got some businesses that were affected by the tier 2 restrictions in October. So we will have businesses that can make a claim for this particular support grant from October up to the date the national lockdown started in November. So the guidance actually suggests grant payments are made to eligible businesses as follows. So if the rateable value is up to £15,000, then they would get £934 per 28-day period that they remain under those restrictions. Rateable values between £15,000 and £51,000, then it's a grant payment of £1,400 for every 28 days. And then rateable values £51,000 and over, it's a 4-weekly payment of £2,100. Local authorities do have the freedom, as I said, to actually determine precise eligibility criteria under this particular scheme, but BES does expect, and it strongly suggests this throughout the guidance, that the funding is targeted through for hospitality, hotel, bed and breakfast and leisure businesses. As you recall, on the 31st of October, BES announced a further grant scheme called the Additional Restrictions Grant Scheme, and a report came, I think it was last week, about this particular scheme, where we've already approved a discretionary scheme policy on the 11th of November. So that is the real the proper discretionary grant scheme that the government have announced. So our policy that was approved on the 11th is going to support businesses which have been required to close because of restrictions but are not on the rating list, such as businesses who lease office space in a larger business or market traders. Businesses which have not been legally forced to close but have been severely impacted by restrictions put in place. For example, businesses in the supply chain, like laundrettes that supply hotels and things like that. And then businesses which are important to the local economy. So you can see from the things that we've outlined in our discretionary policy that this particular scheme will actually support all those businesses that don't qualify for the other grant schemes, which is why we're suggesting we operate the local restrictions support grant open in accordance with the guidance set by BES. The current position then is during the period April to September, as you know, the council distributed over 5,000 grants to businesses, and that was over £57 million worth of support. These further packages of grant schemes that have been announced in October are to support businesses through the ongoing restrictions and now the national lockdown. We haven't had time to consult on this. The time frame from when we got the guidance to being in a position to deliver it is very, very small. And the guidance is quite clear in terms of what the funding is aimed at. Alternative options, yes, we could introduce a discretionary element to this particular local restrictions support grant open, but as I've said, I think really the additional restrictions grant policy that was approved on the 11th is there for our discretionary elements and the local elements of the support that we would want to apply. We do get full funding for the local restrictions support grant open. It's actually determined from the evaluation office agency data. So they will basically search through that data, identify all the businesses in the industries that this grant is aimed to support, and they will work out an amount that we will need to pay in grants to those businesses. They do add a 5% top up to that, and that's because there are inaccuracies in the valuation office data, so that will make sure that any businesses with the incorrect description, for example, we will get the funding to cover those off as well. And New Burdens grant will be provided as well for the council's administration costs and will be covered by those. So that's really sort of this summary of the report. So just to confirm, what we're recommending is that we operate the local restrictions support grant open scheme in accordance with the guidance set by BES, and that we make payments, and the amount of payments are as per the guidance actually stipulates. Thank you.
So, any questions? No questions? Okay. In that case, are the recommendations approved? I will now pass over to David to ask for our decisions.
Thank you. Councillor Crompton, for, against or abstain?
4.
Councillor Ali, for, against or abstain? 4. Councillor Millard, for, against or abstain? 4. Councillor Shaheen, for, against or abstain?
4.
Councillor Moore, for, against or abstain? 4. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. That's in favour, that report is approved. Thank you very much. Okay, we move on now to agenda item 6. Can I ask the Executive Director of Children's Services, Leslie Haggard, to present the report, please?
Thank you, Councillor Crompton. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So this is a report about the recently announced COVID winter grant scheme, and the purpose of the scheme is to ensure that vulnerable households don't go hungry or without essential items over the winter period. So in section 1 of the report, you can see that I've just set out there that the intention is that the period from early December 2020 till the end of March is covered, and the allocation of funding to Sandwell is just over £1.4 million. The official guidance for the scheme won't be made available till the 26th of November, and the government's intention is that we start to roll out the scheme from early December. So this report sets out the activities that we've been taking to date, but the final detail isn't yet available to us. So I can take you to section 3. You can see here that in 3.4, Councils have been told that we can determine our own eligibility in our own local area, but there are some conditions around the way that the funding should be allocated. At least 80% of the total funding is ring-fenced to support families with children, and the other 20% of the total funding to other types of households, including individuals. And also, across that distribution, at least 80% of the total funding is ring-fenced to provide food, energy and water costs, and the other 20% can be on other items that are essential to support people through this period of time. 3.6, you can see that the funding will be distributed in 3 tranches, so we'll have 50% at the beginning of December, and then the remainder will come in 2 instalments of 25% each at the end of February and March, dependent on the data returns that we submit to the Department of Work and Pensions. So the systems for collecting data and making sure that we're using the proportions of money accordingly are going to be really important. In section 4, you can see there that we've set out that Sandwell's already well placed with our local welfare policy to form a good starting point for the way that we can identify eligible recipients, and also that really helps us with systems for allocating funding as well to individuals. In 4.3, you can see there described that the governance for this piece of work is through that operational group that's been established with expertise from across the council, and that group will report regularly through the COVID Vulnerable People's Cell, and then reports on the allocation of funding and other data will be in Cabinet reports as part of the usual council's financial reporting arrangements. So attached to the report, you can see the policy that's used at the moment for the welfare scheme, and also a draft policy and process document for this particular scheme. But as I say, that can only be draft at the moment. And so it's recommended that the Emergency Committee approve that scheme, but also authorise the Chief Executive in consultation with yourself, Deputy Leader of the Council, relevant scrutiny chairs and relevant directors to amend the scheme once we've received the final guidance, and then process it as necessary to make sure that we can put the scheme into operation and report to government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. I can see Paul, your hand's up. Question?
I did have a query which may lead to a further question, possibly depending on the answer. In 3.1, it references holiday activities and food programme to be expanded. I have read the DfE's guidance on this. What I was a little bit unclear about is whether this report is proposing to include that particular scheme as part of this paper, as part of the COVID winter grant scheme, or whether that's simply a reference to that separate fund.
It's a separate reference. So the government announced a number of schemes all at the same time. The winter grant scheme is one of them, but the holiday activities and food scheme is a separate scheme. And actually the guidance for that arrived yesterday. And that's for activities during Easter, summer and Christmas school holidays 2021, with some guidance set out for how local authorities can bring partner agencies together to start to plan for those activities. So we're just starting to have those conversations, and that will be a separate report that will come back through Cabinet or Emergency Committee.
Thanks. That's reassuring to hear, and that the council are going to apply for that particular scheme. My understanding is there's a register of interest has to go in at this particular point, and there'll be further details in the new year. I suppose as just a brief follow-up, at this stage, is the council thinking that would be a scheme that it would deliver itself, or potentially that it would work with partners to deliver? My understanding is it could be either, so the council could directly deliver it or commission somebody.
So the guidance really explicitly says that there must be a steering group pulled together with partner agencies that bring together the plan. So that's the intention at this stage.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions, anyone? No? Are you happy now, Paul? That's okay? Yeah. Okay, in that case, thank you.